The man who runs European football just called more than a dozen World Cup nations boring. And now those nations are firing back, right in the middle of the biggest tournament FIFA has ever staged. This isn't a rumor, it isn't a mistranslation that got cleaned up a day later. It's a real rift that's opened up between UEFA and the rest of the football world. At the exact moment FIFA wants every headline to be about goals, upsets, and history. So how did the head of Europe's own football confederation end up on the wrong side of a World Cup controversy that FIFA never saw coming? Let's start with what actually happened. At a conference in Ljubljana, Slovenia, UEFA president Alexander Čeferin was quoted saying the expanded 48-team World Cup produces a huge number of matches that are, in his words, completely uninteresting. He did add that smaller nations get to feel the pulse of the tournament, but that line barely registered next to the one that stuck. Within days, 13 World Cup nations had responded with a joint statement, released through the South African Football Federation. Cape Verde, Curaçao, Jordan, Uzbekistan, DR Congo, Haiti, Algeria, Egypt, Ghana, Ivory Coast, Morocco, Senegal, and South Africa all signed on. Their message was simple. There is no such thing as an unimportant World Cup match, and every team earned its place on merit. Think about who's on that list for a second. Cape Verde, Curaçao, Jordan, and Uzbekistan were all making their World Cup debuts this summer. Congo and Haiti were back on the biggest stage for the first time since 1974. For those federations, this tournament isn't a footnote. It's the realization of decades of waiting. And the president of UEFA had just told the world, even if only by implication, that their moment didn't matter as much as everyone else's. UEFA didn't deny the comments outright. When reporters asked for clarification, the Confederation pointed back to an older interview where Čeferin hadn't mentioned the expansion at all, which a lot of people read as a non-answer. FIFA, for its part, has stayed almost completely silent on the whole thing, which is its own kind of statement, given how hard Gianni Infantino has pushed the bigger tournament as a legacy project. Before we go further, if you're finding this breakdown useful, take a second to hit subscribe. This channel covers every angle of the 2026 World Cup as it unfolds, and you don't want to miss what comes next in this story. Here's where things get interesting. This isn't just one man having a bad soundbite at a conference. The tension between UEFA and FIFA over tournament expansion goes back over a decade. The idea of a bigger World Cup was actually first floated by Michel Platini, Čeferin's predecessor at UEFA back in 2013. Infantino picked it up a few years later and turned it into FIFA's signature project, pushing the field from 32 teams all the way to 48. So there's a strange irony sitting underneath all of this. UEFA essentially planted the seed for expansion, and now UEFA's own president is the one publicly complaining about the fruit it grew. From FIFA's side, that looks less like honest criticism and more like Europe wanting the credit for a bigger, richer World Cup while quietly resenting having to share the spotlight with more first-timers, more underdogs, and more matches that don't involve traditional powers. That's the bigger issue here. European club football runs on a packed calendar, and UEFA has never hidden its frustration with FIFA squeezing more international windows and more competition dates out of an already exhausted season. When Čeferin talks about uninteresting matches, some observers hear a football opinion. Others hear a European power still uneasy about ceding ground to nations from Asia, Africa, and the Caribbean who are no longer content to just make up the numbers. And then, almost on cue, the football itself made Čeferin's comments look even worse. Just days after the backlash, two of Europe's biggest names were sent home in the round of 32. Germany, four-time world champions, were stunned by Paraguay on penalties after a 1-1 draw, with Kai Havertz missing the opening spot kick and the Germans converting just 2 of their 5 attempts. The Netherlands went out too, eliminated by Morocco in their own shootout. Meanwhile, Curaçao, a nation of roughly 158,000 people that had never qualified for a World Cup before this year, was still out there making history just by being on the pitch. So when Čeferin talks about which matches matter, the tournament itself has been answering him in real time, and not in the way he probably expected. If you're enjoying this kind of deep dive into the politics behind the football, now's a great time to subscribe. New breakdowns are going up as this tournament keeps producing storylines nobody saw coming. Now, let's talk about who actually feels this the most, because it's not FIFA executives or UEFA officials sitting in conference rooms, it's the players and fans from those 13 federations. Imagine being part of Cape Verde's historic run, the smallest African nation ever to reach a World Cup, watching your country celebrate a moment your parents never got to see, and then hearing the most powerful man in European football describe matches like yours as uninteresting. For fans in Kingston, in Praia, in Amman, in Tashkent, this World Cup was never about proving they belonged next to the traditional giants. It was about being there at all. That's what made the statement from those 13 federations land so hard. It wasn't angry or dramatic, it was almost restrained, which somehow made it feel more serious. These are federations that don't usually go head-to-head with UEFA in public, and they did it anyway, together, in one voice. There's also a quieter frustration bubbling under the surface among European fans themselves. Some have pointed out that if matches feel less compelling, it's not because smaller nations don't deserve to be there, it's because the format now includes 72 group stage games, more than the entire Qatar World Cup produced from start to finish. That's a scheduling and format conversation FIFA created, not something the debutante nations are responsible for. So here's the bigger picture. Where does this go from here? The best-case scenario is pretty straightforward. Ceferin or UEFA issues a clearer statement, tensions cool off, and the tournament's back half, the part with genuinely spectacular knockout football, ends up overshadowing the whole controversy by the time a champion is crowned on July 19th. The more uncomfortable scenario is that this becomes a preview of a much bigger fight. FIFA has shown no interest in shrinking the tournament back down, and if anything, the appetite for expansion keeps growing heading toward future World Cups. If UEFA's leadership keeps signaling discomfort with that direction, this could turn into an ongoing power struggle between Europe's football establishment and the rest of the footballing world, one that outlasts this single tournament by years. What FIFA does next matters too. Staying silent might look diplomatic in the short term, but it also means Infantino is letting 13 national federations do the talking for him, instead of publicly backing the expanded format he built his presidency around. At some point, silence starts to look like avoidance rather than neutrality. Quick reminder before we wrap up, if you want to stay ahead of every twist in this tournament, from the politics to the pitch, subscribing is the easiest way to make sure you don't miss the next one. So, where does that leave us? A World Cup built to be the biggest and most inclusive in history is now dealing with a very public crack between the man running European football and the nations who spent years just trying to reach this stage. The football on the pitch has already started answering the critics, with giants falling and debutantes thriving, but the politics off the pitch are far from settled. What do you think? Was Ceferin just being honest about match quality, or did he badly misjudge the moment? And which of these 13 nations do you think benefits most from turning this criticism into motivation? Drop your thoughts in the comments, because this is exactly the kind of storyline that could still shape how this World Cup is remembered.